I think you make a really good point about language and accessibility. We can also discuss about that later, but now I want to introduce our next panelist. Her name is Pamela Pattynama. Pamela is Emeritus Professor of Post-Colonial Literature and Culture at the University of Amsterdam. Her publications include essays on the representation of mixed race in Dutch post-colonial films and literature, and the relation between memory and identity formation. She participated in the Photoclec project on colonial legacy and museums in contemporary European history, and her book, Bittersweet is Indies, Memory and Nostalgia in Literature, Photographs and Films, was published by Prometheus Bertbakker Amsterdam in 2014. So Pamela, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. I would like to begin my talk with this family photograph. It was made in late colonial Indonesia, then called the Dutch East Indies, of course. And it was used on the cover of a recent book containing the memoirs of the late well-known Dutch historian Kees Vasseur. He was born in the Indies and died last year. Now, Vasseur is portrayed here as an angelic little figure, together with his babu, or nanny, a local Indonesian woman. The memoir of Vasseur covers many topics, but contains not a single reference to this woman. So why has this snapshot been used on the cover? As a family photograph, it was part of a familiar genre, and as such, the publishers must have thought it would appeal emotionally to potential buyers of the book. But this commercial reason is supplemented by an ideological one. Time and again, similar street photographs pop up in the Netherlands in the public space and strongly suggest close ties between black and white, white and brown, colonizers and the colonized. They keep the beloved narrative of racial harmony during the colonial past alive. This image evokes the colonial past as a time to be remembered with nostalgic fondness. That the ultimate cliché image of an harmonious colonial past contains a white child and a subordinate dark woman is, of course, telling. It asks, in any case of viewers, to forget complicated matters such as exploitation, unequal power relations, racism for one nostalgic moment. So our Dutch colonial archives are filled with such images of late colonial Indonesia. They circulate widely in the Netherlands and are often, too often, used as evocations of colonial nostalgia. So my ongoing project, Bittersweet India, I wrote this book, but it's an ongoing project, deals with the recycling of cultural memories of the colonial past. It urges me to use the archive in an attempt to go beyond the so familiar nostalgic gaze, to find ways to look differently at colonial photographs. My starting points have been the material and pictorial turn and the social life of things, introduced by anthropologist Arjun Appadurai and picked up by curator Elizabeth Edwards, with whom I worked together in the Photoclec project. Now, Edwards argues that photographs are social actors with an active life, rather than merely passive images that represent a fixed and true history. Following her, I consider photographs as performative objects that serve many roles in daily life. My assumption is that all pictures are performed and determined by the context in which they occur can always be seen as public presentations of the person portrayed. I use, therefore, performance as an analytic tool that provides a perspective for framing photographs. In my research, I focus on a special archive of family photographs, the so-called Iwi collection. And this archive includes more than 60,000 photographs which were taken in late colonial Indonesia, shipped to the Netherlands, and brought together in a collection by Indies migrants themselves. Now, IWI stands for Indisch Wetenschappelijk Instituut, Indisch Scientific Institute, a name which actually mocks claims to scientific knowledge of official institutionalized archives. The collection consists, the EV collection consists mainly of amateur snapshots capturing the everyday life of Indo-European families, that is, families of mixed Indonesian and European descent. And on these pictures, we see family members posing inside the house in lush gardens, leaning against modern possessions, with friends on outings, playing with dogs. So all these pictures were made during the first half of the 20th century, during a very turbulent time of transition. It was the period of the so-called ethical movement, the ethical policy, a time of nation building, violent expansion, and the implementation of modern technologies, civilization, and European bourgeois values. Due to the prevailing discourses on desired civilization and skin color, the social standing of Indo-European people was rapidly decreasing. In sharp contrast to French or British colonialism, the Dutch encouraged interracial unions in the colony, mainly for economic reasons. For centuries, European men and Asian women, called Nyais, had lived together unmarried and had mixed-race children. And these, what Stoller has called domestic arrangements, were the normal, standard households in the Indies. Around 1900, racial mixing became, however, a taboo, and mixed race came to be seen as far inferior to full-blood whiteness and full-blood Asianness. Indo-Europeans were confronted with objectifying negative and inferior images of themselves in official and literary discourses. It became, in short, necessary for Indo-Europeans to invent and fashion new identities. This against the prevailing images of themselves as second-rate citizens. Interestingly, rather than written texts, they used the camera to represent themselves and counter such degrading portrayals. Now, Marion Hirsch has rightly observed that during the 20th century, the camera has become the family's primary instrument of self-knowledge and self-representation. In fact, for Indo-Europeans in the colony, photographs were often the only autobiographical material they possessed. Only a few written documents exist which may serve as Indo-European self-representations. So that is why I came to use family photographs as performative, to explore how Indo-Europeans negotiated the prevailing views on sexuality, race, and civilization in their everyday lives and aspiration. Let's have a look at the next photograph. So this is one of the family photographs stored in the EV archive. What you see is a visibly mixed family, a white father, Indonesian mother, and kids in darker and lighter shades of pale. It's especially obvious that the brown kid on the left in the front is his white father's offspring. Both have the same sticking out ears. And this family must have gone to a professional photographer to record them and to be remembered mixed as they are. Now the next picture is a portrait of an Indo-European family taken in about 1908. A frail old Indonesian woman is seated in the front row, both in the center of the family and in the center of the image. The back of the chair seems to form a crown or halo around her head, whilst the bodies of all the younger women seem to bend slightly towards her. The older woman, whom we can presume must have been a Nyai, obviously has an honored place at the heart of this Indo-European family. This may not seem very special, but it is remarkable, as such an image is in great contrast to dominant discourses which regard Nyais, so Asian-born women living together with a white man, as the main source of white degeneration. In fact, an overwhelming amount of literature written by white authors portrayed the Nyai as an evil figure and a dangerous embodiment of exotic, sleazy sexuality. So what firstly can be gathered from these photographs is that unions between white and brown were a reality which was not hidden as a social taboo. Secondly, in contrast to the overwhelming amount of representations of evil Nyais in official discourses and in literature, in everyday photographs, Indonesian foremothers are presented as the pivotal and honored figures which they must have been in mixed families. Now, this peculiar photograph shows how Indo-Europeans did participate in the desired modern middle-class lifestyle that was aspired. I'm not sure why this picture is taken, but I assume that it may have been taken to celebrate the installation of the toilet. So this woman proudly poses next to this modern procession. Tea drinking in the garden in the afternoon, visible for everybody who passes by, was also one of these Dutch middle-class values. Here you see such a model set up of a neat white nuclear family properly drinking tea together in the garden. And you may recognize the daughter, Helle Haase, very famous Dutch writer about the Indies. So in the second photograph, a mixed-race family's casual but also confident style of self-representation is shown. Family members are having tea and snacks in a disorderly part of a garden, washing lines in the background. No trouble is taken to imitate the neat bourgeois style of self-presentation. They drink tea in the garden, but there's no sign of a teapot. They wave their forks, and cups and saucers have been put down quite randomly on a much too small side table. Note the older Indonesian grandmother. Because of the photographer's viewpoint, the gaze of the viewer is drawn to the plate in the foreground, on which a few snacks wrapped in pisang leaves remain. This image suggests that Indo-European families apparently did not mind having themselves pictured quite distinct from the style favored by elite European families. It confirms that they did participate in the bourgeois ritual of drinking tea in the garden, but the emphasis is much more on a typical Indo-European custom, the sharing of snacks, called snoepen. So all photographs that I showed suggest that Indo-European families, consciously or unconsciously, fashioned themselves by negotiating an alternative way of belonging and difference against the shameful image that they met in institutionalized documents written during the first half of the 20th century. The families participated in rituals. The families participated in rituals that expressed modernity, civilization, and wealth, such as having toilets and cars and drinking tea in the garden. At the same time, they respected their descent from Indonesian foremothers and held on to their own traditions. They, in other words, self-consciously presented themselves to counter the inferior and racist views regarding mixed race identity included in such lifestyles. Well, so my study of the performative quality of these Indo-European photographs is defined, among others, by Frans Fanon's term, decolonizing self-ownership. And I link this to what Michel de Certeau has coined everyday tactics, which refers to the way ordinary people reappropriate and change laws and regulations in everyday situations for their own purposes. To look at family photographs as early selfies or self-representations, as I do, makes it possible to use photographs as an alternative source to the documents about Indo-Europeans written from above. In the Netherlands, many colonial images are looked at through an all too familiar nostalgic gaze. Hence, difficult matters such as exploitations, unequal power relations, and racism are obliterated. And as Paul Bell has argued, the references to colonial violence and atrocities, which pop up every now and then, continuously, do not interfere with this ever-present, persistent nostalgia. So the violence and the atrocity are, of course, an unfinished business in the Netherlands. So I think it important that by looking at photographs as performative, such complicated matters can still be explored in a productive way. And I end this talk by this small slip of the tongue, Indo-European boy negotiating his own place, however small.